Okay. Probably a good idea for us to get started because time will start moving on. So a very warm welcome, everybody. I'm delighted you're able to join us. First of all, a couple of sort of formal notice type of things. Firstly, we don't expect there to be a fire alarm, but should one go off, run. Go out back out in an orderly fashion in the way that you came in and then gather outside. Grateful if you could put your phones on silent as well, that's always appreciated. If anybody needs the bathrooms, there's one in the corridor just down here and then some others in the far side of the office. Any of the staff will point you in the right direction. Theo is going to be in charge of the air conditioning and the heating, so if you find that you're either cooking or freezing, please let us know. Whoever's speaking will try and keep an eye out, and then we'll sort out the temperature accordingly. Alternatively, just stop breathing. So, a couple of other bits of things. On the 20th of December, we've got our members and brokers Christmas party. We sent out invitations to everybody, but if you haven't got one, then please let Aliki know. Aliki's over here, and she'll make sure that things get sent out for you. It's at the place called the Monk, which is not far from Enmore in the city centre. It's a sort of quite funky wine bar, so hopefully it'll be good fun. We're looking forward to as many people as possible to join us. You're probably thinking you've come to a presentation about FFOs, and you've got something about Singapore arbitration on your chairs. There is a reason for it. We had a seminar a while back on Singapore arbitration, and we very kindly had the SMAA sent over some brochures and things for us, but they didn't arrive in time, so please feel to take them away with you, because I can tell them they've gone to a good home and will be useful. So, on to this year's Loss Prevention and Claims seminar. We decided to have a focus on FFO claims, which is fixed and floating objects, things that you manage to hit. So it can be anything from docks, bridges, pipelines, cables. So Simon's going to be talking about those. FFO claims really can be, big, varied, and sometimes, as we'll see in this instance, very, very expensive. He's going to go through some examples and the lessons that are learned from having some of these types of incidents throughout the club. I should mention that these are really examples, and they're in no way intended to be any criticism of the members or the crew. Very often human error is somewhere in the background, and it can be the pilot's error, it can be those that are on the bridge, or perhaps even the systems that are employed. What we look to do at the club is when claims are reported to our board, and that's any which go over $500,000, they have a report which goes from the managers of the club to back up the claim that's been presented, and to talk about the lessons that have been learned, and that's made it more extensive than those claims that go over $1 million. And Captain Simon Rapley spends a lot of time writing those types of narratives that go on the report. And it's not a question of picking at the member, it's a question of how can we learn lessons from the incidents that have happened, and out of that, do we need to develop loss prevention or claims materials which can assist in educating our members? So hopefully these type of things don't happen to them. So that's very much the focus that we have in the seminar today. But just to give you the running order, if I can press the right button. Next slide. No, go back to. Gosh. Here we go. Yes, introduction by me. Simon's going to be talking about the FFO claims. Then we're going to have a little role play, which involves a cast list of several in the office, talking about a pipeline problem. And then I'll be talking at the end about the MLC and some of the issues that have come out of the operation of the MLC in practice. So, with no further ado, I'll pass over to Simon. We'll make the introductions and then take it from there. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for coming. Thanks, Ian. So we're going to start off looking at FFO claims. And well, first I'll introduce myself. For those of you who have not met me previously, my name is Simon Rapley. I'm the Loss Prevention Manager, the Head of Loss Prevention at the West of England, based in the London office. And from London, we also look after our group members as well. I'm a master mariner by trade and a former ship's captain. So my talk will be fairly technical, but I try to keep it simple. But if you want me to clarify anything, or if anything is unclear, I'm happy to answer questions as we progress, so feel free to stop me. I've got 4 case studies for you today, all FFO claims, all very costly, and unfortunately all of these involve West of England entered vessels. So let's, what do we mean by FFO claims? Well, this container vessel was thankfully not a West of England vessel, but this is just a graphic example of what we're talking about, and it's a good example of the costs involved in these kind of claims. This vessel was coming alongside badly in Guayaquil in Ecuador, and they got it all wrong. The flare of the bow was overhanging the jetty quite considerably, and they managed to catch the gantry crane, and the result was inevitable. Thankfully, it's not a particularly big gantry crane, not like some of the very large ones we have now for handling the 20,000 TEU vessels. Still, it was a costly claim, about $8 million in total, $6 million for a new gantry crane, and $2 million to repair the wharf because the bulbous bow was underneath the cap of the jetty and taking out all the piling. And it was complicated by the fact that the gantry had fallen exactly onto where the damage was on the jetty, so it was a very convoluted repair process. So a costly claim, $8 million, but not a West of England vessel, fortunately. However, since I wrote this paper, we have had a very similar claim, and it just shows that FFO claims just keep on happening involving entered vessels, and they're very costly. In the case we've had very recently, one of our 10,000 TEU container ships struck 2 very large gantry cranes in Egypt, and they were only 6 months old. Luckily they didn't collapse, but we managed to shunt them backwards about 6 meters. We insured the vessel via a reinsurance agreement, so the claim against the West of England was only for certain parts of the claim. The claim for the damage to the gantries and the wharf rested elsewhere. We as a P&I club, we had to cover the loss of use claim, and that alone is a full claim. 15 million US dollars for loss of use alone. It's a very costly claim. In that case, the vessel hit the jetty at around 6 knots. 10,000 TEU container ship. She had no tugs fast at that stage, she should have. So we're still investigating exactly what went on. But you'll see from that case and a number of the cases I'm going to talk about in a moment, there is a common theme, which I'll summarize at the end if it's not clear, but it should be fairly clear. So just to look at some facts and figures, in a 2-year period, 2 P&I year period, from 2015 to 2017, FFO claims, we opened 357 claims files. Okay, very high number. A lot of these will come to nothing. There'll be 0 incurred, the file will eventually be closed. But 4 of those, well, total of claims, $76.5 million in that 2-year period. Interestingly, the 4 claims I'm going to talk about today totaled $66.5 million, just 4 FFO claims. Very, very costly. And since the 20th of February this year to now, I'm aware of 4 FFO time claims, total value about $30 million against the club. So we continue to see very costly FFO claims, and they're all very similar in nature, unfortunately. So I'm going to look at 4 case studies involving West of England vessels, just explaining what went on, and maybe we'll summarise at the end some of the failings that led to these very large claims. So just to set the scene, our first one, 30,000 GT, handy-sized bulk carrier. She was going into Chittagong in Bangladesh to discharge a cement cargo. She was under pilotage, the master, third officer, and helmsman on the bridge, so all okay. Helmsman on the wheel. It was early morning, although it was daylight, and there was a bit of restricted visibility, about 300 meters. Interestingly, though, at this time of the morning, 6:30, normally the chief officer would be on the bridge. But this company, it was a Bangladeshi company, one of our members, they operated a very old-fashioned system where the chief officer went and stood by forward when under pilotage coming into and out of port, rather than being on the bridge. So the third officer was on the bridge, the less experienced officer was on the bridge, more experienced was standing by forward. This is an old-fashioned system. I certainly don't agree with it. Anyways, but worth bearing in mind, considering what happened. I've got some screenshots. Our vessel is here from the ECDIS, and you can see the black line is a track coming in. The interesting things on the side here are a speed over the ground, which is 11 knots there, her heading, 50 degrees, and her course over the ground, so what she was actually doing. And that's about 052. So all is okay there, she's coming in, all looks good. The vessel came to a port turn, a left-hand turn in the river. As she approached this, she was getting out of position to the starboard side, and the local VTS called up the vessel on VHF and said, you need to get back in the middle of the river. So they did. They came to port, but they came back far too far. So they went over to the port side of the river. And she continued down the river doing this, going from port to starboard, port to starboard. And she never quite regained control. So if we look at a few later screenshots, she's coming over to starboard, speed over the ground 7, heading 320, course over the ground 311. So she's starting to come back where she wants to go. Then she goes over to the other side. Heading 300, course over the ground 320. So she's going too far to starboard now. She was doing this all the way down the river. So they came back to port. Unfortunately, this time they really overcooked it, and she started coming right over to port. You can see she's in a pretty poor position now, heading towards some shallow water on the port side of the river. Speed, still 7 knots, but she's getting well out of position. At this stage, the chief officer who was standing by forward, he reported via the walkie-talkie that he could see something up ahead. So what did the bridge do? Well, a minute later, they increased the speed, the telegraph, and slow ahead to half head. If you can see something ahead, surely you slow down or investigate. The vessel did start to come back to starboard, to try and get back to the middle of the channel. Unfortunately, it was far too little, far too late, and she ended up right on the riverbank. So you can see the speed is slowing now. She's right on the side of the river. Never quite regained control. And there we go, she's almost stopped now. But it wasn't just a case of the vessel running aground, there was slightly more to it. And just to set the scene, this is a bulk carrier, geared bulk carrier. She was discharging cement clinker alongside. You can't quite see the timestamp. It's about 6:35 in the morning. So the cook is probably in the galley preparing breakfast. The crew are getting up, those who do day work. And they're discharging using one shore gang on number 2 crane. If we look, we'll see the crane swing the grab over to the side in a moment. And then he will stop. Oh, he stopped. What's he seen? Something's not right. Unfortunately, he had seen our ship dead ahead, doing about 8 knots. And she slammed about straight into this vessel that was alongside, discharging cargo, and safely moored, obviously. So you can see this vessel was shunted off the berth, shunted astern, and our vessel is about to hove into view. So what has happened? Well, our vessel hit this 15,000 GT bulker at about 8 knots. That vessel pushed astern, all of the mooring lines broke. She hit the jetty she was alongside. She hit the jetty astern, a grain jetty, and then just the cherry on the cake, she drifted down the river, and just above the grain, or just astern of the grain jetty, the Bangladeshi Navy were about to take delivery of 2 diesel-electric submarines. Fortunately, the submarines were not there, but they'd built all new mooring arrangements for these submarines, and this bulk carrier bounced into those as well. So just to really increase the size of the claim still further. It's worth noting this final bullet point. Our vessel only put her engine astern and dropped an anchor about 2 minutes after they hit the other ship. So what on earth was going on the bridge of that ship? Who knows? We've never quite got to the bottom because in this case the member has not been particularly helpful in us investigating the circumstances. The damage to our ship underway on the forecastle quite substantial. She also hit the jetty, so there was hull damage, shell plating damage, and the force with which she hit the other ship bow on managed to shunt the bulbous bow backwards such that it ruptured the shell plating, and you can see the dent here where the bulbous bow has been forced backwards. So quite substantial hull and machinery claim as well as the P&I claim. The other ship, well, she fared quite badly, significant damage to her forecastle and to her shell plating where she bounced off various jetties. And you can see the damage to the jetty she was alongside. We need to consider this is Chittagong in Bangladesh, so I have no doubt that some of this damage was pre-existing, but you can guarantee that the claimants are going to want us as P&I to make their jetty as good as new, So we are probably going to pay for damage that's been there for 10, 20 years. Similarly, with the jetty behind, you can see that there would have been pre-existing damage, but again, the claim against us is going to be for a nice, shiny new jetty, to make it nice and shiny and good. Unfortunately, we weren't out anywhere near the submarine moorings, but they are back here somewhere. But there was quite substantial damage to those, which needed to prepare quite quickly because the first submarine was due to be delivered a month later. So lots of damage caused to shore infrastructure. Total claim in this case, about just over $5 million US. And luckily, our member is based in Chittagong, a very big Bangladeshi ship owner. Bangladeshi shipping companies are normally a part of very large conglomerates, so they were a big company and they had some political sway. So I'm sure if it had been not a Bangladeshi ship owner, this claim would have been considerably higher. They were able to make agreements with various parties to settle quite quickly, which was the only plus from a very sorry situation. So what happened on this bridge, on the bridge of this ship? There was obviously a problem on the bridge. Bit of restricted visibility, possibly lack of situational awareness, poor ship handling. We're speculating because we don't know. We've never got hold of the VDR for this vessel. This one is always very important. Lack of oversight of the pilotage. Were the bridge team watching what the pilot was doing? Far too often we see that the bridge team don't. The pilot does what they want, and the bridge team are standing there wondering when they're going to go off watch. So maybe that was the problem. You need to consider they didn't act on what the chief officer told them when he could see something up ahead. And this is my theory. Bangladeshi ship going into a Bangladeshi port, the Bangladeshi shipping community is very small. So the pilot may have known the master, may have known all the bridge team. Did they have an argument, a disagreement about the pilotage? We don't know. But the fact that when they hit the other ship, they would have been aware they'd hit another ship. It was 2 minutes before they put the engine astern. So what was going on? We don't know. So moving on to our second case study. You need to remember all these are West of England vessels in a very short period, unfortunately. In this case, it was a 50,000 GT bulker, Gillis bulker, and she was proceeding up to San Nicolas in Argentina, up the Parana River to discharge a cargo of iron ore pellets. Again, she was under pilotage. There was 2 pilots on the bridge, but only one was conducting the pilotage. The other one was resting. Master and the second officer on the watch, helmsman on the wheel, mid-afternoon, so daylight, fairly good visibility, bit of wind blowing, force 4 up to 16 knots. Vessel proceeding around 7.5 knots over the ground. So all looking good. So what happened on this occasion? Well, our vessel is following the river, the Parana River. She was executing a turn to port, gently coming round the river to port, and the pilot gave the order to the helmsman for steady. And for the non-mariners, when you say steady to a helmsman, it means you put opposite rudder on to bring the vessel, the swing to a stop, and then you report the heading back to the pilot or whoever's given the order, the master, whatever. So steady was ordered, the helmsman put starboard helm on, and nothing happened. The rudder stayed stuck at port 5. So then he ordered harder starboard, because the vessel is swinging to port and towards the riverbank. Still, the rudder stayed port 5. So the second officer jumped on the steering control system and he tried various modes and options to try and regain the steering. Then the pilot jumped on it. He did the same, but they did not regain steering. They put the engine on full astern. Okay, good. And eventually, after about 1 minute, they regained steering control. But it was too late. This is the track of our ship. You see the green line here. She came round the corner, and about here, they would have gone steady and tried to follow the river. Instead, she kept coming to port, and typically, the only berth on this part of the river was just here. And unfortunately, there was a gearbolt vessel alongside as well, so we managed to hit the gearbolt vessel and smacked it against the wharf, typically. If we look at a really fine detail of the track of our ship, you won't see it in the detail from where you're sitting, but from this point here to about here is a period of 2 minutes. So there, everything is good, pilotage is going okay, and then suddenly 2 minutes later we're piling into a ship that's alongside. So it just shows how quickly things can go wrong. And you can see from this finer detail here, here's the vessel alongside, here's our ship. We did start to come to starboard, but it was far too little, too late. So what had happened in this occasion? Well, when you're under pilotage or going into and out of port, you normally have 2 steering motors running on your steering gear, so that you've got redundancy of 1 steering motor. When I say steering motor, this is a hydraulic system, powers the steering gear. If you lose one, you've got redundancy. So they had the steering motors running too. That's all okay. They didn't stop. They did not fail. On this occasion, the vessel carried on her pilotage and she went back to Europe with no further problems. When they got back to Europe, they got an engineer on board. He looked at the steering control system and he found there was a problem. So this is our helm. The wheel literally is a wheel. We don't have the big wheels, and unfortunately, like you see in the films, just a little wheel to control the rudder. And we can see there are two systems, electrical systems, coming off the hand steering unit. And what had happened was this item here, this electrical item called a feedback potentiometer, had an intermittent fault. So the order from the wheel was not going to the steering system. There is two systems. If we look in more detail at the steering control system, there's our wheel. There is a control knob here, and we have what's called follow-up 1 and follow-up 2. These are the two different electrical control systems. So when this failure occurred, all they needed to do was switch from follow-up 1 to follow-up 2. But because they were unfamiliar with their steering system and the failure mode, they didn't do it. Let's go back. There was a similar case in Canada a few years ago in the St. Lawrence. Vessel was proceeding under pilotage. The master was not on the bridge, he was in his cabin because it was a long pilotage. Again, steering locked on one side. The second mate was on the bridge again. He didn't know what the problem was. He called the captain. The captain came to the bridge, immediately went to the hand steering system and switched over the control system, and they regained steering. But again, the captain knew what to do on that ship. He was familiar with his system. Unfortunately, it was too late and the vessel hit the riverbank. But at least the captain knew what the failure was and was able to rectify it immediately. So what was the result of this failure? Failure of a small electrical circuit. Well, this was our vessel underway. Damage in way of the forecastle on the port core, port shoulder, damage to the shell plating. See the denting here. Vessel alongside, she was shunted onto the jetty. So again, she had damage to her shell plating, ballast tank framing and so on. And where we hit on the starboard side of that vessel, we damaged the railings. Her accommodation ladder was damaged, her mooring lines were damaged as well, but luckily she did not break free, she actually stayed in position. But the main problem was the damage to the jetty. You can see the cabin there has been forced backwards and upwards, but when we go underneath, you can see that quite substantial damage has been caused with all the rebar sticking out, more so in these pictures. So very substantial damage to the jetty caused by us hitting that ship and smacking it against the berth. Total claims in this case, not so great, 4.2 million. The majority, though, with the damage to the jetty, loss of use, the ship, about $1 million worth of damage that was claimed against us. So what happened on this occasion? Well, we can safely say that the bridge team were not familiar with the failure mode of their steering system. And it's worth noting that one steering gear manufacturer, I think it's CPLAP, they recommend that these feedback potentiometers are replaced every 5 years to stop them failing. Unfortunately, in this case, our vessel involved here was about 3 years old. She was quite a new ship. So even if they'd been following that kind of recommendation, it wouldn't have made any difference. But certainly worth bearing in mind. Just one small item failing can cause a substantial steering failure, and you're guaranteed it won't happen when the ship is in the middle of the Atlantic. It will happen when she's under pilotage. Always the way. So moving on to case 3. 60,000 GT crude oil tanker, slightly different. She was proceeding into Primorsk in Russia to load a cargo of crude oil. Again, under pilotage, master, second mate on the bridge, helmet on the wheel, all okay. Daylight, fairly good visibility. They had 3 tugs in attendance. Unfortunately, the weather was not so great. The wind was blowing towards the berth at about 25 knots, 4-6, and there was a bit of a tidal stream or a current setting the vessel towards the jetty as well. But it's daylight, they've got 3 tugs, all should be okay. Unfortunately, it wasn't. So this is where our vessel was going, berth number 1, Primorsk, and she was coming in starboard side alongside. We found out later that vessels on this berth were only allowed to berth port side alongside, but the pilot asked the captain if he could berth starboard side too, and the captain, not knowing any better, said, yeah, that's fine, let's go starboard side alongside. So we can see our vessel coming in, we can see the weather is setting our vessel towards the jetty. Not ideal, but it can be managed. So, I've already mentioned there's 2 tugs to make fast. We have 3 tugs, 2 are going to make fast, 1 on the port shoulder, 1 on the stern, on the centre line. We made fast the tug forwards, that was okay. And the vessel's main engine was stopped. There was then a delay of 9 minutes while we waited for the second tug to come into the stern and make fast. We don't know why there was a delay, possible technical problems on the tugs, but of course, after the event, the tug company have been very unhelpful. They won't tell us anything to help our case. So we think there was problems on this tug, and later events actually clarified this. And we finally made the tug fast aft through the centre line. The vessel was 370 metres from the berth. Sounds enough, but it's actually about 2 ships' lengths. So she wasn't that far away, and she was still engine stopped doing 4.5 knots towards the berth. So these are some AIS screenshots of our ship coming in. And you can see the tug on the port shoulder, and you can see the one that's on the centre line aft, and this is our standby tug. So here we come. Coming alongside. There's more screenshots in a moment. After we'd made the tug fast aft, within 1 minute, the tug paid out her tow line, it was a tug's line, dropped it in the water and drifted off. So down aft we were left with a towing line hanging in the water and the tug drifting into the distance. And we're rapidly approaching the berth with 1 tug made fast. We were 180 metres, a ship's length from the berth, doing 3.8 knots, so doing a fairly decent speed as well. Engine still stopped. Strangely, the pilot did not order the tug to come back and make fast with a spare tow line, nor did he ask the standby tug to come in and assist. We don't know why. So here we come. The after tug's about to drift away. The chief officer was standing by forward. He reported to the bridge, "You need to go astern, otherwise we're going to hit the jetty." Randomly, the pilot gave the order to let go the anchor. The engine was still working, but it was stopped. So they let go the port anchor, strangely. And the engine was ordered astern, dead slow astern, by the pilot 13 seconds before they made contact with the jetty. At this stage, the vessel was still doing 3 knots. And here she comes alongside. You can see the tug on the port shoulder is trying to pull the vessel away from the jetty. Well, for some reason, the AIS showed 1 tug alongside. That vessel wasn't there. She was out here. But this one is drifting away, the one that dropped the tow line. A few seconds later, slow ahead was ordered by the pilot again. Note, it's always the pilot. The bridge team at this stage had not said anything. Totally silent. It was only 15 seconds after they made contact up forwards with the jetty that the master actually said, "Let's go full astern." Finally, the bridge team had said something. The problem was, although the vessel made contact with her starboard shoulder forward, that was not where the big problem happened. The tug on the port shoulder was pulling the bow to port, so the stern was swinging into starboard as well as the vessel going ahead. And the vessel's stern, or starboard quarter, made contact with a mooring dolphin. Unfortunately, the contact was so forceful, the mooring dolphin collapsed backwards, and we will see the result of what happened in a moment. Afterwards, they pulled the vessel off because they could not make fast. So here is our ship coming alongside. She makes contact forwards, causes some damage here. She's alongside eventually, but the major damage occurred. If we look about here, you will see what occurred. There's our dolphin collapsing, and there is the roadway and pipeline supports collapsing behind it. And you can see the head movement of the ship at that stage as well. She's still moving ahead, and her stern is moving sideways. And the circle, the red circle, is one of the workers of the terminal who happened to be standing around here, who, when the vessel came alongside and collapsed the roadway, ran for his life. So he had a very lucky escape. And this is a graphic of the damage that occurred. You can see this black square at the bottom. That is the footprint of the mooring dolphin. That is the mooring dolphin there where it finally collapsed. And you can see that was pushed backwards, collapsed onto the seabed, and then collapsed all the supports, or pile support, and the structure behind, causing considerable damage. Thankfully, the pipelines did not rupture, they just sagged. So what happened on this occasion? What went wrong? Well, as I've already said, the vessel came alongside on the wrong side. She should have been port side alongside. She had 3 tugs in attendance. The terminal requirement for a vessel of that size was 4 tugs, so we were missing 1 tug. Needless to say, the speed of approach to the jetty exceeded the terminal's requirements. Obviously, we were going far too fast. The bridge team, they said too little, too late. They should have spoken up a little bit, well, considerably earlier. And we were going far too fast. Once it became clear there was problems with the tugs, we should have basically stopped the ship, made the tugs fast, and then gone alongside. And when the engine movements were finally given, it was far too little, too late. Dead slow ahead once you're about to hit the jetty is too little when you're doing nearly 4 knots. Dead slow stern, I should say. So this was the big one. Total claims, nearly 50 million US dollars. And I've put a few of the various costs involved, local lawyers, surveyors. Reconstruction of the berth is going to be a big one, but a considerable one will be loss of use as well. That berth is now out of use until the repairs are finished. Thankfully, no pollution. The pipelines didn't break. No injuries, although I think the gentleman who was on the jetty, when he ran away, maybe he needed some new trousers. But who would we don't know. So moving on to my final case study. Again, let's make a bit of background. Here's our vessel, 50,000 GT, Gearless Bulker. She was proceeding up the Mississippi River in the United States. She was due to load grain. She was under pilotage. The master, second mate, and the cadet were on the bridge. Helmsman on the wheel. They actually had a lookout on the bow because there was a little bit of restricted visibility, but the restricted visibility was not a factor in this case. It was early evening. It was dark. There's a bit of wind blowing, but the conditions were not too bad. The second bulletproof point from the bottom is worth noting. For the non-mariners here, from dead slow to full half to full ahead, these are all manoeuvring speeds. When you're at full ahead, you can go from manoeuvring full ahead to what's called navigation full ahead. And to go between the two, you need to load some software into the engine and run the engine up very slowly. So when you're manoeuvring at above or using the engine above, manoeuvring full ahead, it sometimes takes a few moments to come back again. So you do not have the engine available for immediate manoeuvre. And that was the case here. There was a very strong tidal stream or flow stream coming down the river. There were very high levels of the river. She was doing 13 knots through the water, 9 knots over the ground. So there was a 4 knot river flow against them. So they'd run the engine slightly higher than they would normally. And that was to be their undoing in some respects. The vessel was following the river, doing a gradual turn to port, and coming the other way were 2 push-tug combinations. So typical American tug and barge combinations, 3 barges in each, and these were tanker barges. Do you remember what they were carrying? They had gas oil on board, so very hazardous cargo, and they were what they termed red flag barges, so got to keep clear. And they were coming round the river, coming down the centre line of the river, coming the other way. So this is the river. Here's our vessel in red coming up. The tug and barge combination here, we're about to pull off here. So the orange yellowy one, this is the tug barge combination, decided to overtake on the port side of the blue one because he was about to pull off and go into a rafting area just there. And here we come coming the other way. Okay. So what happened? Well, the tugs and barges, or the tugs, were talking to one another, and they agreed an overtaking manoeuvre between themselves. Although our bridge team heard this, the pilot and the bridge team did not discuss what they'd heard at any point. We listened to the VDR. There was no discussion about these tugs and barges coming the other way. Eventually, our pilot spoke to the tug that was overtaking, and they agreed a port-to-port passing. So, all well and good. And our pilot gave orders to our helmsman to aim for the gap between the tug and barge and riverbank. Unfortunately, as the tugs and barges came round the turn in the river, the tidal flow of the river set them sideways. You can imagine they're not doing any great speed, so they're quite susceptible to the river flow. And they were, and they started crabbing sideways to port. And this was the result. Here is a slow tug and barge, here is the overtaking one, and here is our ship aiming for this ever-decreasing gap between the tug and barge and the side of the river. So we managed to avoid the tugs and barges, so that was good. Unfortunately, with our engines still on, navigation full ahead, we managed to make contact with various tugs, barges, and jetties along that side of the river. And I've actually lost track of how many tugs, barges, and jetties this vessel made contact with, but it was quite a few. And she bounced up at several terminal jetties on full ahead. Just these are some pictures of the various tugs and facilities that we managed to make contact with. So what happened? What are the conclusions? It's worth noting that vessels proceeding downriver in the Mississippi have right of way. And the simple reason for this is they have the river with them, the flow of the river with them, so there is less flow of water over their rudders and they are therefore less manoeuvrable. So that's why they have right of way. So the tugs and barges on this occasion basically had right of way. Interestingly, our bridge team did not discuss with the pilots about these tugs and barges and did not question what they were going to do in relation to the ever diminishing or the navigational situation, which was getting slowly worse. So our bridge team did not speak to the pilot about the gap is getting smaller, maybe we should slow down, maybe we should do something. And it's worth noting that when they did order main engine stop and full astern, because the engine was running above manoeuvring speed, there was a delay. And it was several minutes after the first collision that they actually managed to get full astern. So that was a contributing factor. And it's worth noting the master on the tug that was overtaking, at the time all this developed and happened, was on his mobile phone, talking to his girlfriend, so he was probably more interested in what he was going to arrange for Friday night than what was happening outside the window on his tug. So he was totally distracted. And although the pilot on the bulk carrier had also made a number of phone calls, it was by the NTSB when they investigated this, it was found that they were all operational in nature. But he had been distracted on occasion, arranging tugs, checking what the weather conditions were at the terminal. Obviously, the overtaken tug, the one that was about to pull off to starboard, she was right over the wrong side of the river. She should have been right over to the starboard side, not on the port side. And of course, if you see the situation deteriorating, you slow down. But on our ship, they didn't. They just thought, we can go through this. Well, I can imagine they thought, we can get through this gap, we'll be okay. But they weren't. They should have slowed down. So they had more time to assess the navigational situation. And it's worth noting that after the collision, or the first collision, the pilot did not give any helm orders for about 5 minutes. We can suspect he was in some kind of state of shock because he was silent for quite some considerable period of time. The claim in this case, the headline figure there of 9.5 million, it's a big figure. Unfortunately, the total claim in this case is more like 90 million US dollars. But because of the various parties involved, other tugs, us, we've applied for limitation, and that's a limitation figure. But it's a very big claim because lots of tugs were hit, lots of barges, and lots of terminal jetties were damaged as well. So again, loss of use claims, repairs, and so on and so forth. There were a couple of injuries on one of the tugs, but thankfully no pollution, but still a very, very big claim. So just to summarize, there is a common theme through 3 of the claims, and this is inaction on the part of the bridge team. And we see this far too frequently when there is a pilot on board, the bridge team step back, they don't monitor what the pilot's doing, or it may be a combination of these factors, and they're unwilling to speak up and challenge the pilot. If the pilot is doing wrong, he's only there to offer advice. The bridge team retain the navigational con of the ship. If they think something's going wrong, they should not be afraid to say something, and take over the watch or take over the con, and get the vessel to a position of safety, whatever that may entail. So we also remind your bridge team, never be afraid to challenge the pilot if you think that what he's doing is going to put the vessel in danger. So, and additionally, speed was a factor. And I'm going to talk about the speed of ships coming alongside in more detail in a moment to finish off, but the speed of the ships was a major factor in the magnitude of the damage caused to other vessels, jetties, and so on. Just to finish off talking about speed, because it was a major factor in the majority of these cases, it's worth noting that when civil engineers are designing jetties, the speed they use when designing the capacity of the jetty and the fendering is 0.15 of a meter per second for a vessel to be coming alongside with tug assistance. So what is that? It's about a third of a mile per hour, a third of a knot. And to put it into context, you walk about 10 times as fast. So jetties are generally designed for vessels to come alongside at a very, very low speed. And I put a very fancy formula on the bottom here. I'm not going to try and explain it because that's way beyond my capabilities, but I'm going to put it into context. Speed and berthing energy is an exponential relationship. So if we consider a vessel coming alongside at 1 knot, and say for argument, she's going to impart 1,000 kilonewtons of force into the jetty. If she comes alongside at 2 knots, it will be 4,000 kilonewtons of energy. If she's doing 3 knots, it'll be 9,000 kilonewtons of energy. So the higher the speed, the energy imparted is an exponential function, so it gets more and more. So speed is crucial. Vessel going very fast is going to cause a lot of damage. And if you get the vessel doing a point loading, jetties are designed for vessels to come alongside parallel. I've had a case recently, another big claim, another big FFO claim, where one of our bulk carriers was turning in the river off Shanghai to go alongside a power station's berth to discharge coal. They made a big mistake in the turn, they misjudged it, and she made contact with the jetty at 90 degrees, only at 1 knot. But the contact area right on the stem was about that big. So you can imagine the amount of energy imparted through that very small contact area. It's huge. Caused considerable damage to the jetty. Didn't look much, but it went back quite a long way. And of course, the jetty's going to be out of action. This is a power station that needs a continual supply of coal. So another very big claim. Again, due to pilot error, lack of attention on the part of the bridge team. So speed is crucial. And to finish off, one of our claims there is due to the bridge team not being overly familiar with the steering control system. It's just one part of, or one of many navigational equipment, pieces of navigation equipment on the bridge. But because they didn't instantly know what the problem could be, they weren't able to rectify the problem. So bridge teams need to be familiar with the various failure modes of their equipment. And I've certainly seen from doing management audits where emergency response manuals contain guidance on, if this happens, you lose steering, it could be steering motor fail. Rectification action, start the other steering motor. If you lose control of the steering system, it could be the control system has failed. Change to a different follow-up system. So a bit of guidance is good from somebody who's actually studied what the various failure modes are and how to rectify. And that's our 4 case studies, unfortunately involving West of England vessels, causing us and our membership a lot of money. Any questions? No. Okay, we will move on to, oh, sorry. Thank you.
Clubs share big claims through the pool system. Is there any initiative to share the experiences of such claims in clubs?
Yes.
On the left?
The IG has a system built by we collate FFO claims so that we can try and work out trends. And also, a part of this, apart from working out what has gone on and the root causes of the claims, is looking at where damage has occurred to, for example, jetties around the world. And we like to identify if there's a claimant from a damage to a particular jetty, we can look back from other clubs and see if anyone else has had a claim for damage to the same jetty. But there's been cases where IG clubs have been able to find out that a vessel of another club did damage to that jetty, and they're now claiming against us, for example, for damage that was pre-existing. So it's actually quite useful, and several clubs have been able to review claims based on that information. So certainly at club level, we look at FFO claims as well. Because it costs not just us, but the other clubs via the pool, a lot of them. Thank you. Anyone else?